Hey everybody, Jake here, and today we're taking a look at the Delike Smurfs. What a lovely, lovely name. This is maybe a Smurfish blue, but that's the only Smurfy thing about this pen. The size is a little Smurfy, depending on who you ask. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. So this is a rather cheap Chinese pen. It's pretty. I'll give it that, depending on who you ask. But let's go ahead and go over it. I was surprised by this pen in good and bad ways, but we'll go over all that. Let's go ahead and get into it. On to the size comparison. So here we have the Delike Smurfs at the bottom. Then we have Pilot Metropolitan, M2 Moonman, and then Moonman M2. One of them is the company name, one of them is the pen name. Google either one, you'll get it. And also the pen BBS 323. So the reason I picked these for this particular size comparison, normally I give kind of a range of common pens. The only one common out of this is really Pilot Metropolitan, but all these pens right here are in a very similar price range. And this is the smallest of them. Capped, uncapped, doesn't really matter. It's little. So for some people that's going to be really, really good. Some people not so much. But you can see it is shorter than all of these pens, but not by a lot. It's not significantly smaller when it's capped. Significantly smaller when it's capped. And with all the pens uncapped, it remains about the same. One very interesting thing for me is that this pen, although it's a very similar size to the Metropolitan, just a tiny bit shorter, it feels a lot smaller than the Metropolitan. The Metropolitan, the section feels about the same, a little bit more comfortable because it does flare up just a little bit more. But this pen feels very tiny. And I didn't notice how tiny it felt until I compared it to the pen BBS 323. So you can see it's not really that much. Let me get them lined up here. It's not really that much shorter, but width-wise, it's a lot smaller. To be honest, I vastly prefer the 323 in my hand. But if you have smaller hands, I think this pen would be very... And here it is next to some story cubes. These are like bigger dice that used for storytelling. I don't have anything. I can't come up with a story on the spot like that. Just improvising. That's on to what I like about the pen. So, very first thing, and the biggest surprise to me was the nib. Honestly, it's pretty smooth. It says it's an extra fine, as you can see here. However, this nib functions somewhat similar to what I believe an architect grind is like, in that you can get, depending on how you hold the pen, much wider horizontal strokes and much more narrow vertical strokes. The flow is very consistent, it's reliable, it's nice. Is it the smoothest nib in the world? No. Is it an extra fine? For some people. For example, my wife wrote with this pen and got an extra fine line. I write with this pen and I get something more akin to maybe a Western extra fine, maybe. Kind of pushing it. So I believe it really depends on how heavy-handed you are, but that's the case with a lot of pens. But the nib writes well, and that's probably the biggest redeeming factor of this pen, in my opinion. So the cap threads on this are really nice as well. I complained in my Moonman video about the cap threads. They're like frosted. I didn't like them. Cap threads on this are nice and chunky, and I really, really like thicker threads that have less rotations. One of my favorite pens to cap is the Levenger LTEC 3.0. Those threads on that pen are just perfect. So these are pretty good. They're nice and smooth. There's no whine or anything like that. The threads that screw the section onto the body are also pretty good, but they're a little bit more narrow. But you really won't be unscrewing those all that much. Speaking of which, this pen is a standard international cartridge converter. It does come with a converter, which is kind of standard with these Chinese pens. And, it's okay. It's not a bad converter. I haven't had any issues leaking or anything, and the piston's pretty smooth. It has one of those little spring agitators in it as well. I'm just kind of mix up the ink that you'll find a lot in these cheaper pens. I did notice when writing with this pen, because I test all pens in reverse writing, I don't do it every day, or hardly ever. I found myself doing it a lot with this pen, though, for a very particular reason. This pen writes like insanely fine lines when you write with a reverse. What I would imagine to be like an ultra extra fine from Platinum's line. I think that's about what you're going to get with this. The design of the pen is interesting. I can appreciate it. It's, you know, that there's an almost completely flattened top here with a pointed end, and it results in something unique that you really don't see every day. I can appreciate it, as I said. Do I like it? No. I think it's ugly. But that's just me. I really like flat top pens. I really like rounded pens. Not a huge fan of the super pointy kind, but, you know. But if they'd gone flat top on this on both ends, I think I would have liked it more, but it would have made it shorter, unless they just, you know, went ahead and filed out the material a little bit longer. But I don't like it. That doesn't mean you can't. The material they chose is pretty interesting. It's kind of like this cracked acrylic look. And one thing that I always appreciate, whether it's a $100 pen or, you know, a $12 pen, the cap lines up with these cracks. Most of them go into one another, and it's pleasant. They could have completely avoided that, not even tried. I don't know if they did try, but it lines up for the most part, about 80% of them, which is plenty for me. It's not visually distracting or anything like that, so I vastly appreciate if they did put any effort into it, the effort they did put into it. That's what I'm neutral towards. First up, this pen doesn't have a clip. I think its design would look even more strange with the clip, even stranger. I'm not sure grammatically how that would go. Doesn't matter. But a lot of these Chinese pens seem to be just getting rid of clips. I'm not sure if it's to save money or what, but a lot of them just don't have clips. Does it bother me? Not really. I do use clips every now and then. But the biggest thing for me is the roll stopping capabilities, because this pen rolls everywhere, which I honestly don't notice all that much until I take off the cap and put it down. And of course it doesn't roll then. Jesus. Or when I'm doing like size comparisons for the videos. So usually when I put down the pen, it's not doing it this time. It's trying to make me look like an idiot. Doesn't have to try very hard, but it's trying. But a clip would, or some sort of roll stop faceting would have been, I think a faceted version of this pen would look very nice, actually. We'll get into that later. The material on this pen is, you know, it's okay. It feels alright. It doesn't feel super crappy, but it really doesn't feel that good. It's nowhere near TWSBI plastic, or, to be honest, the Moonman and the Pen BBS both feel miles better than this. The Moonman feels a lot more sturdy, so does the Pen BBS. And to be honest, I like both the materials a lot more. Personal preference. It just doesn't feel as nice as those other two. And with it being in a similar price range, it's a little discouraging. This pen is not super long, and that's not helped by the fact that you cannot post it. Well, you kind of can. You can do that, and then I can do that. So, as you can imagine, posting's not really an option here. So if your hands are too big, or much bigger than mine, you won't like this. If you got small hands, probably be fine for you. The section on this, speaking of small hands, is very narrow. I don't have a huge deal with the Pilot Metropolitan section. It's a little tiny, but it's not bad. This is borderline uncomfortable for me. In the similar price range, out of those other three pens I showed you, the Pen BBS 323 is my favorite. It's a little bit bigger. I like the shape a little bit more, and it's a little shorter, which doesn't really impact, or it's a little longer, which doesn't really impact anything. but it helps a little bit if you. Some people hold their fingers like this. Some people hold them a bit more laid out. You know, it's preference, and I don't prefer this one. Is it bad? No. Actually, my wife liked this pen a lot. I'd mentioned the recent giveaway to her, and she's like, "You're not giving away this pen, are you?" And I was like, "No, no, no, no." So this is hers now. As soon as I get done with this, she's claimed it. That's saying something. She's pretty picky. Last thing, the packaging. I've already reused the box to store miscellaneous pen-related items, but it's somewhat similar to the Moonman box. You don't get the eyedropper, but it's like this, plastic with a little foam insert. If you want to take a look at that, check out my unboxing for this pen. I will say, though, for the price, it's nice to have a box thrown in, especially when you're comparing it to something like a Jin Hao, which makes this pen seem a bit more premium. It's nice to have a box thrown in that you can store stuff in. And it has a nice little cutout for the pen, things like that. So that's just a nice inclusion that you get kind of tossed in with the price. On to the dreaded dislike section. Actually, there's only a couple of things here. Most of my stuff fell in the kind of neutral area. Just a few things, like I said. The size for me doesn't do it. I don't like this pen in my hand. I really, really, really dislike it, to be honest. It's probably the least comfortable pen I've held in a very long time. Now, again, that said, my wife loved it. If you have smaller hands, you might really enjoy this. Or if you like really narrow sections, you're going to really, really like this pen. It's little. And even when it's capped, to be honest, it's not that big. I wish they would cap it a little more deeply. I think it only goes up to about there. So if they put that little extra bit, I think this would make a decent pocket pen, especially with the price. So, the only thing I'd say against this pocket pen is you could probably eyedropper convert this if you were willing to. You couldn't really see ink level or anything like that, which would kind of be detrimental, but you could probably do that. If you're going to, don't keep this in your pocket. That would be a recipe for disaster. The price on this pen is too high. Let me explain that a little bit. So, if you don't compare it to another fountain pen, it's fine. But if you're comparing it to a Jin Hao or a Pen BBS or a M2 Moonman M2 pen, or probably its biggest competition or most well-known competition, the Metropolitan, it doesn't hold up. It can't. In my opinion. This is all opinion-based, guys. Don't freak out on me. I don't hate this pen. And, it's probably going to get recommended, but it's in a very, very, very tough price bracket to be competing with other well-tested, well-known, and well-liked pens. The design is kind of eye-catching. The material's eye-catching. That they might be using that to set it off. But when I was looking, really, there were no choices for nib size or anything like that. The pen's about $13. If you asked me, hey, I want an interesting looking pen with a very unique design for about $13. Get a Pen BBS 323. Because for the price, it's just, in my opinion, better. So it's up to you, but I feel like for this pen in particular, the value isn't quite where it could be. All right, on to the writing sample. This is actually my second take because it did have a slight hard starting issue, which you can kind of see here, but I haven't run into that before now. Just thought I'd mention it. And it's doing it again. There we go. Okay. So this is the Delike Smurfs. Also, that name is just terrible. That's just a horrible, horrible name for a pen. I'm sorry. Also, got an extra fine nib. And the ink in here is Organic Studios. Ernest Hemingway. Santiago's Sea Blue. I'm having some skips here as well. I'm wondering if it just got dried out while I was, showing the pen off. Probably so. So, it's not bad. The nib is, I hesitate to say dry. It's pretty decent flow, but this is a very wet ink, so that may be assisting it somewhat. You can get some line variation if you press it. So there's a normal, there's with some pressure, and here's what I want to really show you guys, the reverse writing line on this, if it will do it. There we go. Very, very narrow. And I'm having more skips with this pen. This is giving me quite a bit of issues. Okay, I had mentioned also that it's kind of an architect grind style nib, so if you hold it a bit more straight up, you're going to get somewhat more narrow horizontal strokes. If you hold it down, you're going to get a bit wider ones. It's kind of a bent nib tip. Let me see if I can, I'll show you in just a moment. You can kind of see it there. But you can also get more narrow horizontal stroke or vertical strokes. So depending on how you hold the pen when you're writing with it, you can get some decent line variation. But you can write very, very small with the reverse side of this nib. I don't know why anyone would want to write this small, but you can do it if it works. There we go. So you can see here, this is a standard Rhodia dot grid. You can write really tiny. Also, there's the bent nib, and you can get some decent line variation depending on how you write with this pen. And as I said, it isn't extra fine, but to be honest, comparing it to something like the Moonman Medium, you're gonna get, pretty similar results. So it nib width varies manufacturer to manufacturer. I have a video on that if you want to go check that out, shameless plug. But the pen performs pretty well, except for right now during this writing sample. In conclusion, this is a very interesting pen that I don't think quite gives you the value that you can get from some other pens. Unless, and this is a pretty big unless, you prefer smaller pens. So, what I mean is, the Jinhaos, from the ones I've tried, the X750, X450, they're fairly large pens. They're not necessarily long, but they're very thick, very wide. The Pen BBS is pretty big. Moonman M2 is, kind of a medium-sized pen. If you're wanting something smaller than those, this is not a bad choice. It writes well. I really hope that you like the nib, because there's not a whole lot of choices there as far as I could see. But it's not a bad price if you're wanting to try something like this, or you just like this material, and you have, 10, 15 bucks. Try it out. It's not bad. It writes. It's reliable. There are a few shortcomings, but that's to be expected with any pen in this price range. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you like what you see, please feel free to subscribe and check out my other videos, and like the video. Thanks, guys. Bye.